Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I actually came up with the title for my video before I actually recorded the video, and it is just what it says on the title. The Twitter is a hive of scum and villainy. Quite literally, I would say the Twitter is a hive of scum and villainy. And it is affecting comic books in a way, in a negative way, and that has been generated throughout since the 90s forward, or the early 2000s at least forward, and is making the big two into the SJW infested haven that they actually are right now. Now, I'm going to start off with that fairly negative note and run with it, but hopefully I'm going to come up with some positivity at the end of this, so hopefully you can stick with me to the end. But this is what you see on Twitter. Now, I really didn't follow any social media at all until quite recently, right before I actually put up this channel, because I wanted to see and follow diversity in comics, because a lot of the stuff that he puts on YouTube, he talks a lot about what's going on in his Twitter accounts. I thought I'd go and check it out. And really, I could do without it, but it's useful and I do follow a couple of things, so I'm going to stay there. But for the most part, it is a hive of scum and villainy. And Richard over at Diversity in Comics has said this in one of his recent videos, saying that, you know, these people, these SJWs, they go onto Twitter and literally they spend an afternoon going through your entire Twitter feed, going through each tweet to see if there's anything that they can use to call you a racist or a bigot, or if anything they can take out of context to call you a racist and a bigot. And that's literally what they do. And these people are using this platform in order to attack people. So you have these toxic people using this platform. Now, I'm not for deplatforming anybody. If these toxic people are on there, well, I have a thick enough skin that I'm going to ignore them and call them ridiculous when they actually speak to me, but I'm not going to say deplatform them. But on the other hand, they are saying that we should be deplatformed, and they have the actual advantage because, of course, Twitter is run by far leftists. And it's really no mystery why that they have chosen Twitter, that the big companies like Marvel and DC, but especially Marvel, have chosen Twitter as one of their go-tos for their advertising. Now, I've gone over this a couple of times in some of my videos, but I'm going to go over it again in a little bit of a different way. It's the fact that this is what the SJWs did. And Richard Meyer has gone over this a couple of times too. It's that they took over their message boards in the 2000s, the message boards in the chat rooms. You know, because when I gave up, when I saw SJW-isms rearing their ugly head in 1997, you know, around that time, and I gave up on comics, I was still reading the letter page. For the most part, people sent in letters still, right? But in the early to mid 2000s, this is when the chat boards and the chat rooms, you know, took off for comics. And to some extent, I was one of those people who went on the chat rooms and talked about comic books. I still, even though I didn't buy new comics, I still love to talk about comics. And I didn't so much use the discussion boards, but the chat rooms. And what happened, briefly, is the fact that you had these far leftists, and they would get themselves into a moderator position, a position of power. And they would appoint other moderators that were far leftist, that they made sure were far leftists. And once they got themselves a critical mass of these people running this board, whatever it was, then they would elbow out anybody who wasn't a far leftist, so there were just only those people left, and then they jury rigged the rules so that anybody who was posting on the board, if they didn't post things that were in accord with their far leftist ideology, they were automatically banned. And that's what happened to a lot of message boards and a lot of chat rooms, especially for comic books. And they use this, the far leftist people use this in order to bring about this SJW utopia that we have in comic books today. Because, of course, everything posted on all of these sites were far leftist ideas. So they took this to the people who ran the companies that produced comic books and said, hey, look, everybody who reads a comic book is a far leftist. You can see it by looking at the chat rooms, by looking at the message boards. Obviously, since your entire board, your entire chat room, is talking about nothing but and agreeing with nothing but far leftist ideas, then your comic base are far leftist. You should be producing far leftist comic books. You should be putting far leftist ideology in your comic books. And for the most part, I don't think the companies really disagreed with this or looked too far into it. Even if they did look into it a little bit, it would actually seem to be the case just because the whole game was fixed by the SJWs running these boards to begin with. But as I've always said, for the most part, people who work in the arts are on the left side, and to say that they should be putting in more leftist ideology isn't that big of a push. So this is where the SJWism really took hold, I would say, in the mid-2000s. Everybody usually agrees on about 2004 to 2008, and that's what happened. But for all intents and purposes, these message boards and chat boards, they died when social media took over. And social media covers everything. But there are subsections of things, of course, even within social media. And it, again, is no surprise that the social media platforms are run by far leftists. We already know this, and we can see in the news that even now there are congressional hearings about the fact that, conservative voices are being silenced, and they're allowing nothing but leftist voices to speak in these things, and they are skewing everything. They're skewing this perspective of everything so that it looks to be in favor of far leftist ideology. And that's what happens on these sites. And again, I'm not for banning people or even shadow banning them or deplatforming them, but I am very much against the fact that you give one people exclusively a megaphone to speak, and everybody who disagrees with them, you put them in a silent room where no one can hear them and they don't actually know they're there, which is what happens with shadow banning. But Marvel, certainly, Twitter, DC to some extent, but Marvel mostly, they utilize Twitter a lot. They utilize Twitter in order to sell their product. They put a lot of effort into their Twitter page, and if you look at their actual normal page for their web page for Marvel, it's always pointing towards Twitter, always pointing towards there. And so they use this as an advertising tool. And again, because you have this far leftist bent on Twitter, and you have a lot of these toxic people on Twitter, then they are able to convince still these companies that yes, it is your far leftist people who are actually your comic base. And this, again, I went over in a separate video about the fact that Marvel becoming a lifestyle brand. In a lifestyle brand, how you actually use a lifestyle brand is that you apply it and you appeal to a subculture within the society. It exclusively works that way. And it really looks like, if you look at the minutiae of how this all was set up by Marvel, that their subsection of the society that they are appealing to aren't actually comic book readers and aren't actually comic book fans even. They are SJWs and far leftists, because they have been convinced over the last 20 years-ish that these people are their core audience, and this is who they should be selling to. And this echo chamber of Twitter with your toxic far leftist people is just perpetuating that false idea for the large companies. And it's perpetuating it again because the far leftists have much more of a platform on something like Twitter, but especially Twitter, I would say. Now, one of the reasons why I would say this is because I've gone over the Marvel Twitter feed a couple of times, and it boggles my mind, and it really begs the question, what in the world is going on with these Twitter sites? Because you have Marvel, and right now it has something like 6.75 million. So over 6.75 million people following their feed. And yet, when you look at the likes on their tweets, they can barely scratch up 1/4% of the people to hit like. Now that doesn't make any sense to me. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense at all, because I was comparing it to my little channel, right? Where I have roughly like 100 subscribers and I can get 10 likes. That's 10%. If I can get 10 likes, how can a giant company like Marvel, run by Disney, not get 10% of its followers to hit like? How can they not even get 1%? Because they're not. They're not even getting 1/3 of 1% to hit like. And this is what exactly is the problem with comics, because you see that these people on Twitter, because Twitter is a hive of scum and villainy, these people are the people who want to use comic books, not people who actually consume comic books. And the people who are following this far leftist ideology of a company, which is Marvel, they are the ones who are clicking on the subscribe button, for the most part, I would say, but not actually paying any attention to what is going on at Marvel. And that is killing the company to some extent, or at the very least, the small part of the company which produces comic books. And this is why it is killing the comic book industry, because they have this skewed idea that A, their base audience is far leftist, and B, that Twitter is a representation, a true representation of how people think and how they're going to act and use their money, which it really isn't, because all it is somewhere where these far leftists are actually using this platform to skew things in their direction, to make it look like they're actually in control and they are the ones who are supporting all of these things, like Marvel. So this is a skewed perspective in many, many ways, made purposefully skewed in order to make these large companies view their market as far leftists, so that these giant companies will act in a far leftist way. Now, I would say that these giant companies are very okay with using far leftist ideology, to say the least, but they're smart enough so that if they had concrete evidence that, you know, their bottom line is being drastically affected by this kind of ideology, they would steer away from it. However, that is why, and it's been going on, you know, in the back of my mind for a little while now, that Twitter really is one of the main reasons, one of the toxins within the system of the healthy comic industry. It is one of the poisons that is killing the industry for the most part. So the thing is that I still find Twitter a little bit useful. I still find it a little bit, you know, good to follow people like Indiegogo campaigns or crowdfunded comics, or people who put out these kinds of comic books. In that way, it gives me a good reference and able to click on one to the other. So what I'm proposing and hoping to do in the future is, and in one of my videos and also on Twitter, I am going to publish just on my Twitter, you know, I'm going to publish what I'm going to call a whitelist. And I'm going to specifically use that term just to see how many SJWs I can tick off. My whitelist is going to be the opposite of a blacklist, of course, because I don't think we should be so much blacklisting people. If you want to actually unfollow some people, if you want to make sure you don't buy their comics, you go right ahead. That's fine. I don't think we should blacklist people. I think we should whitelist people. I think we should have a list of comic creators who, and this is just very, very basic, who, one, are good to the fans, you know, who respect the fans when they speak to them, and two, who respect the fans when they either draw or write their comic book. And, you know, those are two very, very simple things. And, you know, we all know that people like Ethan Van Sciver or John Malin, those are the two big names, you know, they are people like that. They will listen to their fans. They're very polite to their fans, and they're very good. But I want to make a list, not just of these bigger people, but of medium-sized and even smaller creators, in order to follow these people, in order to give a list of people that are actually good to fans and that will hopefully produce and help produce a good industry for people who are out there that want to find good comics. Because, you know, I think that the way that people should determine whether or not they're going to read a comic right now is to find an actual good author or a good artist, find him, and then follow him. Follow him wherever he goes. Go towards where his books are published. To some extent, I'd like to do it for publishers, but I would like to do it more with the individuals themselves. And just to show people that, there are good comic creators out there. You should follow these people. It doesn't matter who they publish with. It doesn't matter if they have an Indiegogo campaign or publishing with Antarctic or possibly Alterna or some of these smaller companies who aren't far leftist leaning, at the very least, hopefully aren't far leftist leaning as I can see. Then follow them there. Go where they go. Buy their product, because you're going to get a good product, and that's what we want. That's specifically what I'm always saying. We're looking for a good product, and that's what we want. So follow these people because you're going to get a good product out of them. Don't bother following a line that is infested with SJW-isms. Don't bother following a company that is going to turn on you. Follow these people. Make it really basic. Find a good person, and that's hopefully what my whitelist will help do if I can get my whitelist going. I have a few that I want to add to it, but I would also like and ask you in the comments if there's anybody, in the medium to small range that you know of as a comic creator that you would like to be included on the whitelist, then give it to me and in the comments, and I will look them up and see if they can be included in this, because I don't think I'm going to try, at the very least, I'm going to try to make sure that I don't include anybody who doesn't want to be included. So that's my request to you today, is to leave me a comment, to put forth for me, if you can, anybody who you think should be included on a whitelist for comic book creators. Somebody who's good to the fans and produces a good product, which is to say a product that customers want. Because we need to get rid of following and just being part of these toxic systems like Twitter. And at the very least, if we do use them, to use them in a vein that is going to promote the people who are actually trying to produce things, who are actually looking for a healthy industry. All right, so if I gave you anything new to think about, hit like, hit subscribe, leave me a comment, leave me a name or a number of names if you want. I don't care. You leave a list if you want of people that you think that are good comic creators, that are good to their fans and actually have a passion and make a good product. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.